Greetings, all greetings. We'll step out early in the morning, look around, and see what it's like. When I woke up earlier this morning, no clouds. Anyway, the cycle continues. Rains, what we call the rainy season, and the dry season. What we call the spring, the summer, fall, and the winter. The changing of the equinox that people built a religion around. Anyway, I listening on a conversation the other day, or this is several. It has occurred on several occasions that people make the same argument about, or attempt to make an argument about one generation as compared to the next, and not really knowing or having a knowledge of what happened past generations. And that can come from, that's the result of parents who don't pass on information to their children, especially in the communities of former slaves. And we can see that happening. You can see the result of that right now in America, where the former children of former slaves are divided into two groups. One who begin their lineage in slavery, and the other who begin their lineage saying that Africans were originally not Africans, but they say we are not African. We were originally in America. And when they brought over a few Africans, but we were enslaved. We were taken into slavery in America. We were the original Americans, or we are the original Americans, not were. And that lack of knowledge is gonna create a problem later on, but I'm not gonna talk about that. The people of the Caribbean got the same thing. They know that they were Africans in the Caribbean before they arrived. But you never hear them say, we were the original people in the Caribbean. And that's because one of the things that the British did in the Caribbean is teach history. Not all perfect, but taught. We know that there were Africans here. All over the Caribbean, you find archaeological sites where showing Africans were here. but it was showing other people also, other peoples that the Africans mixed with. Nevertheless, it goes back to that cycle in history where we rise up as a so-called civilization, and in that cycle of building and destruction, there's one group of people who survive the destruction and stay in a state which is tied to the earth. They learn to live with the earth, knowing cycles and how to work within that area. They're the other people who survive and bring the technology with them. Not really the technology, but the knowledge with them. And it is, they already built the infrastructure that if something drastic happens, or not if, but they're gonna detonate it if it get to that point. That's the way it is. The Caucasian is not allowing people to overcome him because he knows what he did to other people, and if they have that power over him, he knows what's going to happen, or he estimates what's going to happen. So rather than let it come to that point, he's going to detonate everything, and then with his technology, the corporation is going to reform and then start releasing that technology. It has happened before. And we as a people don't really pass on information, family to family, children, parents to children. I say we as a people, not individuals. There are individual families who do that religiously, as the saying goes. And those are the families who survive and prosper. When I say prosper, they're into the what we call wealthy families, like you see throughout Africa. More throughout Africa, there are tribes who can give you a history. They can repeat their history from years, going back years. Like my aunt, who took care of me from the time I was born, my father, my uncle, they sat me down literally. They wrote down in a book the family lineage. Who is whose father, who's going back to Nigeria, Benin, and then back to the east. Every family doesn't do that. In 1991, the so-called fall of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall, if you look at it carefully, you will see the same events taking place right now. The only thing is in the Middle East instead of Russia. 1973 energy crisis, you see the same thing taking place right now. But we as what do we call African Americans, black people, colored people, you gotta sit down and say, look, the generation this and generation that, they did this and they did that. They didn't do this and they didn't do that. Not realizing these things go in cycles, or not stopping to look at it and see the cycles and comprehend that they are going to have to fight almost the identical fight that we have fought in our generation. Because the people at the top, as we call it, the top is the people who make the decisions that the rest of the world follow. They can't follow any other cycle except the one that they know. America will be a stronger country today if when Martin Luther King stood up and say, make us equal, they had done it. They won't be this fight with China today if that had happened. But these people only know one action. And they're reverting right back to that action today. Before it was the African who they enslaved. Today it is everyone. Even their own people, their own. If you look at the world population, you'll see that now it's about 5% owns 90%. 1% owns about almost 50% of the resources. And the other day, the conversation now is about Elon Musk and his becoming a trillionaire. So you got one man on the planet that has the equivalent of the rest of 35% of other human beings on the planet. And that's the way it is. They don't know any other way to do it. A lot of people are going to die. I've seen numbers in 2/3, but that's only the initial. First round of whatever war. And right now, we are seeing the death, and nobody is taking it into consideration. And we are looking at the wars and the starvation, hunger, and all that. And the other thing we're not looking at is that men have decided we're not going to have children with women who are not going to honor us. And I don't mean in a manner that you thinking. Each of us has a place. Either we work together to accomplish the task that we as men have to do, or we separate. And the survivor is always the male, except in rare circumstances. because the male can change his environment, he can adjust very quickly, whereas a female can't. And that's part of the problem. You see nations upon nation upon nation whose males are, in China they call it lie flat. Japan they call it lie flat. Korea, the males are saying, we stepping out on society. We're not going to do anything. You're not interacting with the females for any purpose whatsoever. So the population is going to die. And people are not taking that into consideration too. It's not all going to die by war or starvation. Population is already declining because of this one action. And it's beginning to happen in Black America, Caribbean, and in Africa. Everybody's talking about how Africa is going to have the world's largest population. And I keep telling you, it may not happen. Why? Same foolish African leaders that keep running around the world talking about how we got this young population can serve as the workforce for whatever the Caucasian want to build. And nobody in Africa is telling them, hey, you know they're building robots to do all the stuff that you are trying to push your people to do. Anyway, knowledge. Stop the foolishness. You think you're safe because you may be in America. Say, I'm not leaving America because of, you see what's happening to America now? Iran. And it's not just Iran. When you got a big brother, it's like Europe had a big brother, that is NATO. All over the world. Libya, Tunisia, everywhere. Now look at what America is being forced out of the Middle East into a regional power. And from the regional power, you go into a divided nation. Nobody don't see America as a nation divided into 6 different nations. And if they do, they're not talking about it. But 1945, America was at the top of its game. Began to take over the British Empire, the French, everybody else. Spanish, well, the Spanish were taking over long ago. But now, 70 years later, within a span of one person's lifetime, look what's happened. The man who adjusts will live. When the environment changes, you have to change. If you don't, you're going to die. So you might say, this person didn't do anything to help you, and this generation did it. Forget about that argument. You better stand up and start working on what you can do, because when Gen Z or Gen X or whatever, when they're gone, it's going to be you. You have to face the music. I keep keep saying that the young people of Africa better stand up, get rid of this stupidity that their leaders are doing. And it may seem to some of them that we can just sit around and live like we have always done. Go right ahead. When the Soviet Union fell, there was a rush to take over the resources. And that's the reason why the wall came down. There was a agreement made to give Europe those resources so that they can bring the world into a new era. That's why they were pushing electric cars so hard, because they were going to be able to make them and nobody else could. The world would have to come to their door for everything. But look what's happened. Now Russia is exerting its power. Europe has lost almost all of its business. All its corporations that used to be powers in the world stage drifting away. Some to America, some to China, and the rest have died. If you don't start looking at this situation carefully and making an adjustment, you too is going to go the way that Europe went and that Africa went 1,000 years ago. You can say 2,000 years ago. It's up to you. But today you gotta choose, otherwise somebody's gonna choose for you. When you in a crisis and you have to make the tools, if your hurricane comes and your house blows down and you gotta rebuild your house and you don't have a hammer and nails, you gotta either buy one, beg for somebody to give you one, or make one yourself. And in the case of Black Americans, Caribbeans, and European black people, you don't make hammers and you don't have one, and the hurricane is coming. Peace. And oh, the African too. Africans everywhere, I should say.